One of America's great strengths, I think, historically, has been that we've tended to be quite achievement oriented. We look at a task, we size up what's necessary to do it, then we go for it, and we check it off. Um, and I think that is one reason why the United States has produced so many achievements in so many areas. But if we're not careful, that can get us into some trouble artistically and musically. It can get us into some harmful thinking that I'd like to touch on briefly here because I've seen this far too often. Um, so let's say if we think about something like the Third Mozart Concerto, um, purely in terms of what it takes to negotiate it, we're going to see it as a student piece that is maybe a little more advanced than something like Accolade Concerto, not as advanced as Mendelssohn. You need to go such and such a position. You need X, Y, and Z bow strokes, and once you can do that, then you've done it. Then you need to your next step is something like Mendelssohn Concerto or whatever the case may be that requires more fluency in higher positions, a bit wider variety of bow strokes. Okay, then once you've done that and can do that, then on to Stanislav Tchaikovsky, whatever the case may be. Um, and what that overlooks is that there is a big difference between the basic techniques required to merely negotiate a piece of music and the technique, not to mention the musical insight, right? But even just the basic technique required to play a piece really well. Let's take something like the Third Mozart Concerto. Um, it's if you're looking at it in this sort of its place in terms of hierarchy based on difficulty of just negotiating it, it's not going to be very high in the ranking of concertos. Um, but in order to play it really well, in order to bring out the that operatic differentiation of voices, to really make each character, each voice, its own distinct entity, to bring out Mozart's wittiness, um, and to bring out that incredible sense of beauty that he can convey that often has this sense of veiled sorrow to it. And to do all of those things requires a great deal not only of musical insight but and elegance and sophistication, but even just simply technique to do those things. Um, and we miss that entirely if we think of it purely in terms of the techniques required just to negotiate. If we treat it basically like an etude on our way to the next etude on our way to the next etude, um, it's a very musically detrimental, but even technically detrimental way of thinking. And I have seen, I think for this reason, very often in America, that we have graded systems of repertoire that operate along exactly these lines. We'll say, such and such is a first grade piece, such and such is a third grade piece, such and such is a 10th grade piece. Um, as if if you play the Third Mozart Concerto in third, fourth, fifth, whatever grade, and then if you think you're at a seventh grade level and a teacher were to say, I think it would be good for you to go back and study a Mozart concerto or restudy the Third Mozart concerto, you almost feel offended. It's like, what have I done wrong? Why are you demoting me? Which is completely absurd, and it's a product of this very harmful thinking that I've been describing. Um, there is always benefit to going back and studying great repertoire. And if you think of yourself as being above certain literature, which I've often encountered among students. I'll go to a summer festival or something, and a student will say, "Oh, I learned, say, the Third Mozart Concerto this past year, so," and they'll imply something that suggests, "So I'm beyond it. I've moved past it." And I think, "Oh, really? Well, that's good for you because I certainly haven't." And what I was saying is that if that attitude of moving beyond something characterizes our approach to repertoire, then what are you going to play when you think you've arrived? Are you only going to play Brahms concerto, or what if you think you've mastered that? Is there something, whatever you think is harder? People have different ideas of what the hardest pieces are. Are you only going to play that, and you're going to think it's beneath you to play anything else? So, I mean, in that case, you're going to miss. Actually, you'll probably end up playing a small handful of super virtuoso violin concertos, Vinyavsky first concerto, or a few others, and you won't touch these really great musical masterpieces. Are you not going to play sonatas, or are you going to play them in an uninvested sort of way? You think, oh, that requires no further investment for me. If so, obviously, you're going to hit a wall artistically, but you're also, I think, going to hit a wall technically. We have to, as performers, as musicians, we have to embrace the reality, and it takes some humility to admit this to ourselves. But to play anything well is a challenge. And there are different degrees of challenge, but the moment we say such and such doesn't present any challenge to me and doesn't require any investment of me, we're going to get into trouble. We have to embrace that to play anything well requires challenge and embrace that challenge, because the most difficult things about playing the violin are also the most basic, and that's the secret. You know, you can you can play whatever fireworks you want to play, but you know what? Once you've learned all that repertoire and have made your first pass at it, and then you're going back and playing other things, I guarantee you, the things that you're going to keep coming back to are the basics: good sound, good articulation and gesture, good intonation. Right? These are the things that we just chisel away at all our lives because we never arrive. Right? Even if you have really good intonation, it can always be better, and that's okay. Right? That's part of our artistic journey. But the moment we pretend that we should be beyond struggling over intonation, we should be beyond crafting good phrasing, then the moment you think you don't have to worry about them, you're going to start to regress, or at least you're not going to progress. You're not going to dig deeper, and your technique as well as your musicianship will suffer. And I've just seen far too many students affected with that very unhealthy attitude, and I think we do well to be aware of that. And once again, just to sum up, to play anything well requires challenge, and it represents a challenge and requires our investment, requires our effort to play simple music really well. So embrace that challenge.